The emergency room doors had barely closed behind Sarah Davis when her husband turned and walked away, 8 months pregnant and struggling to breathe through the pain. She watched Michael Davis leave the hospital without looking back. His board meeting, he insisted, mattered more than waiting beside his wife and unborn child. Doctors paused. Nurses exchanged uneasy glances. Families in the hallway witnessed a woman abandoned at the moment she needed her husband most. Sarah said nothing. She simply lowered her eyes as if she already knew something no one else did. Michael believed he was rushing to save his company. He had no idea the woman he had just left behind owned enough shares to decide whether he would remain its CEO. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and what your local time is. If you believe dignity always outlasts arrogance, consider subscribing so you won't miss more stories where patience, truth, and justice quietly find their way to the surface. Seattle wore the quiet gray of early autumn, the kind of morning when low clouds softened the city's skyline and the rain seemed content to linger without ever becoming a storm. The headquarters of Davis Biotech rose above downtown like a monument to ambition, its glass facade reflecting a future that investors praised and business magazines celebrated. To the public, the company represented innovation, relentless growth, and confident leadership. Behind that polished image stood Michael Davis. At 37, Michael had earned a reputation as one of the youngest CEOs in the biotechnology industry. Newspapers admired his determination. Financial analysts applauded his bold decisions. Employees respected his long hours and uncompromising standards. Few questioned how much of his success had been built upon sacrifice, because success often concealed the cost that families quietly paid behind closed doors. Sarah Davis had once admired that same determination. She first met Michael nearly 8 years earlier at a charitable investment conference hosted in Chicago. While others competed for attention, Michael spent most of the evening discussing ideas instead of himself. Sarah noticed his sincerity before she noticed his confidence. He spoke passionately about building a biotechnology company capable of making advanced treatments affordable for ordinary families. At the time, he owned little more than a small laboratory, a handful of researchers, and an idea that many investors considered unrealistic. Sarah believed him. Unlike many people around her, she had grown up understanding both wealth and responsibility. Her father, Richard Davis, had built one of the country's most respected private investment firms through patience rather than publicity. Although sharing the same surname, Richard had no family connection to Michael. Their coincidence of names amused friends whenever introductions became necessary. Richard often reminded his daughter that money revealed character rather than creating it. "Wealth is only useful," he would tell her, "when it protects people instead of controlling them." Sarah carried those words into adulthood. Despite graduating near the top of her class in finance, she avoided becoming the public face of any corporation. She preferred research analysis and long-term strategy over interviews and celebrations. She found satisfaction in studying companies identifying honest leadership and investing quietly where she believed lasting value could grow. When Richard met Michael for the first time, he recognized something familiar. Not perfection, potential. Over several years, Richard gradually invested in Michael's young company through carefully structured funds that attracted little public attention. Each investment arrived with one condition: management must remain independent. Michael believed anonymous institutional investors were supporting his dream. He never knew the largest source of capital came from the father of the woman he loved. By the time Michael proposed marriage, Davis Biotech had expanded beyond anyone's expectations. Sarah accepted without hesitation. For several years, their marriage reflected the partnership they had promised one another. They celebrated every milestone together. Michael often returned home late from work, but he still found time to cook dinner on weekends. Sarah reviewed financial reports only when he asked for advice. She intentionally avoided becoming involved in corporate decisions because she wanted Michael to succeed on his own merit. When Richard became seriously ill, he made one final decision that almost no one would ever discover. His attorneys established a private family trust. Instead of dividing his largest investment among multiple beneficiaries, Richard transferred every controlling share of Davis Biotech into that trust. The documents named Sarah Davis as the sole beneficiary and ultimate voting authority upon his death. The arrangement was entirely legal. Every transfer complied with federal regulations. Every ownership record existed exactly where it should. Yet, confidentiality agreements prevented the company's executives from learning who ultimately controlled the shares. Only 3 parties possessed the complete truth: James Whitmore, Richard's longtime attorney, the trust division of the private bank that administered the assets, and Sarah herself. When Richard passed away, Sarah inherited far more than wealth. She inherited responsibility. James had offered to announce her position immediately. She declined. "If Michael discovers this from me," she had said quietly during their first meeting after the funeral, "he'll never know whether people respect him because he earned it or because they're afraid of my vote." James had studied her for several moments before nodding. "You understand this will become more difficult with time." "I know. And if the company changes, then I'll protect the company." "What if protecting the company means opposing your husband?" Sarah had remained silent. Not because she lacked an answer, because she hoped that day would never arrive. Months turned into years. Michael's confidence gradually transformed into certainty. Certainty slowly became pride. Pride became impatience. As Davis Biotech expanded into international markets, board meetings multiplied. Investor calls filled weekends. Vacations disappeared from the calendar. Birthdays were postponed. Anniversaries became business dinners interrupted by constant phone calls. Sarah rarely complained. She learned to eat dinner alone. She learned to fall asleep before Michael returned home. She learned that silence often prevented arguments from becoming permanent wounds. When she became pregnant with her first child, she believed life might finally slow down. Instead, Michael accelerated. He convinced himself that one more acquisition, one more expansion plan, one more successful quarter would create enough stability for their family to enjoy later. Later became his favorite word. Later, they would celebrate. Later, he would take time off. Later, everything would be different. Sarah noticed something else changing. The quarterly shareholder reports sent by the Trust's bank no longer matched the optimism Michael expressed at home. Certain consulting expenses had increased dramatically. Executive bonuses appeared unusually large. Several vendor contracts were routed through unfamiliar companies. None of the discrepancies alone proved wrongdoing. Together, they formed questions. Sarah never accused anyone. Instead, she opened a notebook Richard had once given her. Across its first page, she wrote only one sentence: "Observe before concluding." Every week, she compared reports. She highlighted unusual transactions. She recorded dates. She copied references to board resolutions. Whenever something seemed inconsistent, she noted it without speculation. James occasionally called to ask whether she wished to exercise her voting authority. Her answer never changed. "Not yet. The numbers concern me," James admitted during one conversation. "They concern me too. Would you like me to investigate?" "Only gather documents that already exist. No accusations. No accusations." "You still trust Michael?" Sarah looked toward the nursery, where folded baby clothes waited inside an unfinished crib. "I trust the man I married. James understood the distinction. She had not said she trusted the executive Michael was becoming. Outside their home, financial journalists praised Davis Biotech as one of the fastest-growing biotechnology companies in America. Inside the house, Sarah quietly filled another page of her notebook. She never imagined those careful notes would soon become evidence, nor did Michael realize that every decision requiring the approval of unseen shareholders ultimately rested in the hands of the woman who still waited each evening for him to come home before dinner grew cold. By the time autumn settled over Seattle, the distance between husband and wife could no longer be measured in miles or working hours. It was measured in unspoken truths. One of them believed he controlled the future of an entire corporation. The other already possessed the legal authority to save it or to change it forever. Monday mornings inside Davis Biotech rarely began with quiet conversation. The executive floor came alive before sunrise as assistants prepared briefing folders. Analysts updated financial projections, and department heads hurried between conference rooms, carrying laptops and coffee cups with equal urgency. Michael Davis preferred it that way. Momentum, he often said, left no room for hesitation. At precisely 7:30, the weekly executive meeting began in the company's largest boardroom. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Elliott Bay, but almost no one noticed the view. Every seat around the polished walnut table represented influence, and every decision carried consequences measured in millions of dollars. Daniel Brooks, the company's chief financial officer, spoke first. Unlike Michael, Daniel rarely displayed emotion. His calm voice and carefully chosen words had earned him a reputation as the most disciplined financial executive in the organization. Investors appreciated his confidence. Board members admired his efficiency. Michael trusted him almost without question. The expansion into California can still happen before the end of the fiscal year, Daniel said while projecting a series of financial charts onto the screen. But we'll need additional financing before the fourth quarter. Michael leaned forward. How much? Approximately $180 million. Several department heads exchanged uncertain glances. The figure was considerably larger than previous estimates. Rebecca Collins, the company's vice president of corporate strategy, entered the discussion before anyone else could object. Rebecca possessed an extraordinary ability to make risky decisions sound inevitable. She never raised her voice. She never interrupted aggressively. Instead, she guided conversations with quiet confidence until people believed they had reached her conclusion on their own. If we hesitate now, she explained, our competitors will move first. Michael nodded. I agree. Benjamin Carter shifted uncomfortably in his chair. As general counsel, Benjamin rarely involved himself in financial strategy unless legal concerns existed. Today he had brought an unusually thick folder. I'd like to raise one issue before we proceed. The room became noticeably quieter. Benjamin opened the folder. Several proposed transactions require approval under our shareholder governance policies. Daniel answered before Michael could respond. We've handled similar approvals before. Not on this scale, Benjamin replied evenly. The controlling shareholder has never objected. Benjamin closed the folder without raising his voice. The controlling shareholder has also never been asked to review transactions of this magnitude. Michael sighed. The ownership trust has never interfered with management. Benjamin chose his next words carefully. That doesn't mean they can't. Rebecca smiled politely. Benjamin, with respect, we've operated successfully under the current structure for years. The law doesn't change because history has been convenient. Silence settled over the room. Michael finally spoke. We'll proceed. Prepare whatever documents are legally necessary. Benjamin nodded, although the concern remained visible in his expression. I'll prepare everything." He did not add the sentence he was thinking. "Provided the documents survive legal scrutiny." After the meeting ended, Rebecca caught up with Michael outside the boardroom. "You're letting Benjamin slow you down. He worries too much. Lawyers always do." Michael laughed quietly. "He keeps us out of trouble." Rebecca folded her arms. "Only if you allow him to." The conversation lasted less than a minute. Yet Daniel observed every word from across the hallway. He made no comment. He simply returned to his office and locked the door behind him. Inside, he opened a spreadsheet that existed on no company server. Several vendor payments appeared under unfamiliar consulting firms. The invoices looked legitimate. The approval signatures looked genuine. Only Daniel knew how carefully those companies had been structured. He closed the file just as Olivia Parker knocked gently. Michael's executive assistant had worked at Davis Biotech for nearly 6 years. Organized, discreet, and remarkably observant, Olivia noticed details most executives overlooked. "Mr. Davis asked for the updated investment schedule." Daniel smiled. "I'll send it." Olivia hesitated. Benjamin seemed concerned. He always does. But today felt different. Daniel's expression remained unchanged. "Focus on your work, Olivia." She nodded politely before leaving. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Daniel's smile disappeared. Meanwhile, across the city, Sarah Davis sat beside the nursery window in their home. The rain tapped softly against the glass. Stacks of shareholder reports rested neatly beside her notebook. She had spent the previous evening comparing financial statements with banking records provided through the family trust. Numbers rarely lied. People often did. One consulting contract immediately caught her attention. The amount itself was not extraordinary. The payment schedule was. 3 nearly identical transfers had been authorized within 6 weeks. Each payment went to a different company. Each company listed a different mailing address. Each address belonged to the same office building. Sarah underlined every entry without writing a conclusion. She reached for another report. Executive travel expenses had nearly doubled despite fewer international conferences. Marketing expenditures increased, while advertising campaigns decreased. Research funding remained unchanged, even though new laboratories had supposedly opened. None of it made sense. She wrote another short note, "Verify before assuming." Her phone vibrated quietly. James Whitmore. "Good morning." "Morning, Sarah. I received another quarterly packet." "So did I." "What do you think?" James paused briefly. "I think patterns are beginning to emerge." "You sound cautious." "I am. Because of the numbers. Because patterns become evidence only after independent verification." Sarah appreciated that answer. It sounded exactly like something her father would have said. "I don't want speculation. You'll have documents. I don't want rumors. You'll have certified records. I don't want surprises." James answered gently. "I can't promise that." After ending the call, Sarah opened the notebook Richard had given her years before. Most pages contained dates, transaction references, board resolutions, questions, very few opinions. She believed written facts carried more weight than emotional reactions. Her father had taught her that anger disappeared quickly. Documentation remained. Late that afternoon, Linda Davis arrived unexpectedly. Michael's mother entered without waiting for Sarah to answer the door completely. Linda had never openly disliked Sarah. She simply believed her son deserved someone more ambitious. "You look tired," Sarah smiled politely. "I'm 8 months pregnant." Linda glanced around the nursery. "I hope Michael isn't letting this distract him." Sarah answered calmly, hasn't missed much work. I'm glad. Linda adjusted her handbag. The company's entering an important period. So Michael says. He carries enormous responsibility. Sarah nodded. He does. Linda looked directly at her. You understand why the company has to come first. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Finally, Sarah replied softly, I understand responsibility. Linda seemed satisfied. She left a few minutes later without noticing the financial reports resting on the nearby table. After the front door closed, Sarah looked toward the nursery once again. She placed one hand gently across her stomach. The baby moved. She smiled for the first time that day. Across town, Michael remained inside his office long after sunset. Daniel entered carrying another stack of documents, more financing agreements. Michael rubbed his eyes. We're moving quickly. We have to. Michael signed several pages while listening to Daniel summarize each proposal. He trusted the explanations. He barely read the details. Neither man noticed Benjamin standing outside the partially open office door. He had come to discuss governance procedures. Instead, he quietly watched another agreement receive Michael's signature. Benjamin said nothing. He returned to his own office and drafted another legal memorandum, recommending additional shareholder review before further approvals. He emailed it directly to Michael. Then he saved a copy for the company's records. Benjamin had begun preparing for the possibility that one day someone would ask whether anyone had tried to stop what was happening. He intended the answer to be yes. By the end of that week, Sarah's notebook contained 6 additional pages. Daniel's confidential spreadsheet contained 9 more transactions. Benjamin's legal file contained 4 unanswered warnings. Michael believed his company was advancing faster than ever before. In reality, 4 different people were moving toward the same truth from 4 different directions. Only one of them already possessed the authority to decide how the story would end. The first contraction came just after 5 o'clock on a rainy Thursday morning. Sarah Davis had been awake for nearly an hour, unable to find a comfortable position in bed. During the final weeks of her pregnancy, sleep had become increasingly difficult, but this pain felt different. It was sharper lower and far more consistent than anything she had experienced before. She sat quietly on the edge of the bed, placing one hand beneath her stomach while timing the discomfort on her phone. 7 minutes apart, then 6. By the time Michael stepped out of the bathroom adjusting his tie, Sarah had already recorded 5 contractions. He noticed the color had drained from her face. Are you all right? I think we should call Dr. Foster. Michael looked at the clock on the nightstand. It was barely 6:30. I have the board strategy meeting at 9. Sarah forced a small smile despite another wave of pain. I'm not asking you to cancel anything. I'm just saying. I know. She slowly stood, resting one hand against the dresser until the contraction passed. I think it's time to go. Within 15 minutes, they were driving through the wet streets of Seattle toward Harbor Medical Center. Rain streaked across the windshield. The radio remained silent. Neither of them seemed interested in filling the quiet. Michael kept one hand on the steering wheel while glancing repeatedly at the dashboard clock. Sarah noticed. She said nothing. Her breathing grew slower as another contraction tightened across her abdomen. Michael finally spoke. Maybe it's a false alarm. Maybe. If Dr. Foster sends you home, I can still make the meeting. Sarah turned toward the passenger window. Outside, commuters hurried beneath umbrellas, each carrying concerns invisible to strangers. She wondered whether any of them realized how quickly ordinary mornings could become unforgettable. Harbor Medical Center was already busy when they arrived. Michael parked near the emergency entrance before helping Sarah out of the car. She leaned against him during another contraction. For a brief moment, she felt the husband she had married years earlier. Then his phone rang. The screen displayed one name, Daniel Brooks. Michael answered immediately. "Tell me." Daniel's voice came through the speaker with unusual urgency. "The board just moved the meeting forward." Michael frowned. "Why?" "Two institutional investors are demanding updated financial guidance." "I'll be there." "We're also expecting legal counsel." Michael stopped walking. "When?" "In less than an hour." Sarah quietly continued toward the entrance. Michael caught up beside her. "I'll stay until they examine you." She nodded. "Of course." Inside the emergency maternity department, nurses quickly placed Sarah in a wheelchair and escorted her into an assessment room. A few minutes later, Dr. Emily Foster entered, carrying Sarah's medical file. Emily had cared for Sarah throughout the pregnancy. She immediately recognized the seriousness in Sarah's expression. When did the contractions begin? A little after 5. Emily completed the examination without unnecessary conversation. When she finished, her expression became noticeably more focused. "Sarah, you're showing signs of preterm labor." Michael looked up. "What does that mean?" "It means we need to monitor both mother and baby very carefully." "Can we stop it?" "We'll try." Emily looked directly at Michael. "I recommend you remain here." Before he could answer, his phone vibrated again. Rebecca Collins. He silenced the call. Then it rang once more. This time he answered. Rebecca wasted no time. "The boardroom is full." "I'm at the hospital." "I know." "The meeting can't happen without me." "It absolutely can." Michael remained silent. Rebecca continued. "If today's vote fails, investors will interpret it as weakness." "My wife is in labor." "I understand." Her voice softened. "But you're also responsible for 2,000 employees." Michael closed his eyes briefly. "I'll call you back." He ended the conversation without another word. Emily had heard enough to understand the situation. She folded Sarah's chart. "Mr. Davis, your wife may require emergency intervention if the labor progresses." "I know. If that happens, we'll need immediate decisions." "I'll stay until—" Emily interrupted gently. "This isn't something you schedule." Sarah watched both of them without speaking. She knew Michael well enough to recognize the conflict unfolding behind his expression. He loved achievement. He feared failure. Whenever those two forces collided, achievement almost always won. Another contraction came. Sarah gripped the hospital bed rail, but made almost no sound. Emily adjusted the fetal monitor. The baby's heartbeat remained steady. For now. Several minutes passed before Michael's phone rang a third time. This time, it was Daniel again. Michael stepped into the hallway. Sarah could hear only fragments. "They're asking about shareholder approval?" "We need your signature." "Benjamin keeps delaying." "If you're not here." The conversation ended quickly. Michael remained outside for several seconds before returning. His face had changed. Not with panic, with decision. "I need to go." Emily stared at him. "What?" "I'll come back as soon as the meeting ends." "We don't know when she'll deliver." "It shouldn't take long." Emily kept her voice calm. "If complications develop, your wife may need emergency surgery." "I'll answer my phone." Emily's expression hardened slightly. Operating rooms don't pause while family members finish meetings. Silence filled the room. Michael looked toward Sarah. She appeared exhausted. Her hair clung lightly against her forehead. One hand rested protectively over the child they had waited months to meet. For one brief second, uncertainty crossed his face. Then Rebecca's earlier words echoed in his thoughts. "You're responsible for 2,000 employees." He convinced himself that leaving now was temporary, necessary, responsible. "I'll be back before anything happens." Sarah looked into his eyes. She searched for reassurance. Instead, she found determination. She nodded once. "Drive carefully." Those 3 words surprised him. He had expected anger, questions, perhaps tears. Instead, she simply released him. Michael leaned forward as if intending to kiss her forehead. His phone vibrated again. He stopped halfway. "I have to go." Without another word, he turned toward the hallway. Nurse Grace Miller had been updating medical records nearby. She watched him leave. "So, he's leaving," Emily answered quietly. "It appears so." Grace looked toward Sarah. "I'll stay with you." Sarah offered a faint smile. "Thank you." The automatic doors at the end of the corridor opened. Michael disappeared beyond them. The sound echoed longer than anyone expected. For several moments, Sarah continued looking toward the empty doorway. Not because she expected him to return, because she already understood he wouldn't. Emily walked back beside the bed. "I'm sorry." Sarah slowly shook her head. "Don't be." Emily hesitated. "He should have stayed." Sarah lowered her eyes. Everyone chooses what they believe they can't afford to lose. Another contraction interrupted the conversation. This one lasted longer. Emily immediately called for additional monitoring. Within minutes, 2 more nurses entered the room. Equipment was adjusted. Medication was prepared. Someone contacted neonatal specialists as a precaution. The pace inside the room accelerated. Outside, the rain continued falling across Seattle. Nearly 30 minutes later, while Sarah rested between contractions, she reached for her phone. She opened only one contact, James Whitmore. Her fingers paused above the screen. Then she typed a single sentence. "Please come to Harbor Medical Center. Bring the trust documents. Do not inform Michael." She pressed send. Less than a minute later, James replied, "I'm on my way." Sarah locked the phone and placed it beside her pillow. She did not cry. She did not call Michael. She did not ask anyone to persuade him to return. Instead, she quietly watched the fetal heartbeat continue across the monitor. Steady, patient, waiting. Far across downtown Seattle, Michael entered the executive elevator inside Davis Biotech. As the doors closed behind him, he believed he had made the responsible choice. He thought he was protecting the company that had become his life's greatest achievement. He had no idea that at that very moment, the woman lying alone in a hospital bed had just summoned the only person capable of legally changing the future of everything he believed he owned. The executive boardroom on the 32nd floor of Davis Biotech had been designed to inspire confidence. A single wall of glass overlooked downtown Seattle and Elliott Bay beyond it. The polished conference table stretched nearly 30 feet, surrounded by leather chairs occupied by directors, senior executives, outside advisors, and representatives from several institutional investors. Every person in the room understood that the company stood at a turning point. Michael Davis entered with only minutes to spare. "Sorry I'm late," he said, placing his briefcase beside his chair. Daniel Brooks immediately slid a folder toward him. "We've delayed the opening vote." Michael loosened his jacket. "Good." Rebecca Collins offered a reassuring smile. "Everything is under control." Benjamin Carter remained silent. His legal pad already contained several handwritten notes. The independent directors appeared less relaxed than the executive team. Everyone sensed that today's discussions carried unusual weight. The chairman, Harold Bennett, cleared his throat. "Let's begin." Financial projections appeared across the large presentation screen. Daniel walked confidently through revenue forecasts, projected acquisitions, debt structures, and international expansion plans. The numbers looked impressive. Growth curves climbed steadily upward. Future earnings appeared stronger than ever. Michael listened with visible satisfaction. Several board members nodded in agreement. Yet one question returned repeatedly. "What about shareholder authorization?" Harold Bennett asked it first. Daniel answered smoothly. "Our ownership trust has historically delegated voting authority." Benjamin looked up. "Historically?" Daniel glanced toward him. "Yes." Benjamin folded his hands. "We should avoid assuming that historical practice guarantees future approval." Rebecca leaned forward. "Benjamin, is there any indication the trust intends to oppose management?" "No." "Then we're discussing hypothetical concerns." Benjamin chose his words carefully. "No, we're discussing fiduciary obligations." The room grew quiet again. Michael finally intervened. "The controlling shareholder has never contacted management directly." Benjamin met his eyes. "That doesn't eliminate their legal rights." Michael exhaled slowly. "We'll address any issues if they arise." Benjamin wrote another note without responding. Across the City Harbor Medical Center existed in an entirely different world. No polished presentations, no investment forecasts, only monitors, soft voices, and the steady rhythm of machines measuring 2 lives at once. Sarah Davis lay quietly beneath warm hospital blankets while another contraction gradually eased. Dr. Emily Foster studied the fetal monitor before offering cautious encouragement. The baby's heartbeat remained stable. Sarah smiled faintly. "That's good." "It is." Emily pulled a chair closer to the bedside. "We've slowed the contractions a little." "So there's time." "I believe so." Sarah nodded. Time. That word suddenly carried enormous meaning. She wasn't thinking about labor anymore. She was thinking about decisions, about evidence, about responsibility. Less than 20 minutes later, James Whitmore arrived, carrying a dark leather briefcase that looked older than many of the hospital staff. Despite the urgency of Sarah's message, James entered calmly. He had spent nearly 3 decades practicing corporate law. Panic had never improved legal judgment. "How are you feeling?" Sarah answered honestly. "Tired." "And the baby?" Emily responded before Sarah could. "Stable." James smiled gently. "That's good news." After Emily stepped outside to review laboratory results, James quietly placed the briefcase beside Sarah's bed. "I brought everything." He unlocked the case. Inside rested neatly organized folders protected by labeled dividers. Family trust, share certificates, voting authority, bank verification, board correspondence. Sarah looked at the documents without touching them. "So it's official." "It has been official for years." James removed one sealed envelope. "This arrived from the bank this morning." Sarah accepted it carefully. The letter contained formal confirmation that every administrative requirement governing the Davis Family Investment Trust had now been completed following Richard's estate settlement. Her authority as controlling shareholder no longer depended on temporary trustees. Effective immediately, every voting right belonged exclusively to Sarah Davis. No further approvals were necessary. No remaining procedural conditions existed. James watched quietly while she finished reading. "You now control 54.8% of all voting shares." Sarah folded the letter. I never wanted control. I know. I wanted Michael to build something he could be proud of. James nodded. He did. She looked toward the nursery bassinet waiting near the hospital window. But pride changes people. James remained silent. He had represented enough wealthy families to know that grief often revealed truths more clearly than arguments ever could. Sarah finally asked the question that had occupied her thoughts since Richard's funeral. If I had told Michael years ago, James answered before she finished. You'll never know. She lowered her eyes. No. You made the decision you believed respected both your father and your husband. I also made it believing Michael would never force me to choose. James understood exactly what she meant. For years, Sarah had separated two parts of her life: her marriage, her legal responsibilities. Now those worlds had begun colliding. A gentle knock interrupted the conversation. Nurse Grace Miller entered carrying fresh medication. I'm sorry to interrupt. James stood politely. We're finished. Grace smiled at Sarah after James stepped into the hallway. You have a wonderful attorney. He was my father's attorney first. Grace adjusted the IV line. Your husband hasn't called. Sarah looked toward the ceiling for several seconds. No, I'm sorry. Sarah's answer came softly. So am I. Grace hesitated before speaking again. I've worked here 11 years. Sarah looked back at her. I've seen husbands faint. A small smile appeared. I've seen fathers panic. Another smile. I've seen people accidentally wear their slippers to the delivery room. Sarah laughed quietly for the first time that day. Grace continued. But I don't think I've ever watched someone leave because of a business meeting. The room fell silent again. Sarah finally said, Neither have I. Meanwhile, inside Davis Biotech headquarters, the board meeting entered its fourth hour. Discussion had shifted from expansion plans to financing structures. Several independent directors expressed concern over increasing debt exposure. Daniel responded with carefully prepared projections. Rebecca emphasized market opportunities. Michael defended aggressive growth. Benjamin continued documenting every recommendation requiring shareholder approval. During a short recess, Harold Bennett approached Benjamin privately. You look troubled. Benjamin answered honestly. I am. Why? I've advised caution 3 times. And no one wants to hear caution while profits are rising. Harold nodded thoughtfully. What worries you most? Benjamin glanced across the room toward Michael. Confidence. Harold frowned slightly. In whom? Benjamin's answer remained measured. In everyone. Back at the hospital, Sarah's contractions suddenly intensified. Emily returned immediately. The medication isn't slowing things anymore. Sarah inhaled carefully. So we're moving forward. It appears so. Emily quickly examined her again. Then she looked directly at Sarah. I believe you'll be meeting your baby much sooner than expected. Within minutes, nurses prepared the delivery room. Medical staff moved efficiently but calmly. James remained nearby without interfering. He answered several administrative questions when hospital staff requested emergency contacts. When they asked whether Sarah wished to notify her husband, she quietly shook her head. No. Are you sure? Yes. Emily heard the exchange. She said nothing. She respected Sarah's decision. 2 hours later, after one final difficult stage of labor, a sharp newborn cry filled the room. Every conversation stopped. Every movement paused. For one unforgettable moment, nothing existed except the unmistakable sound of new life. Emily smiled broadly. It's a boy. Sarah closed her eyes. Tears finally escaped despite every effort to remain composed. Not tears of loneliness, not tears of anger, only relief. Grace carefully wrapped the baby before placing him into Sarah's waiting arms. "He's beautiful." Sarah whispered the words almost to herself. The tiny boy opened his eyes briefly before settling peacefully against his mother's chest. His small fingers instinctively curled around one of hers. At that exact moment, several miles away, Michael stood before the board, explaining why Davis Biotech's future depended upon bold leadership. He did not know his son had just been born. His phone remained on silent inside his jacket pocket. The meeting continued. Back in the hospital room, James quietly approached Sarah after the nurses finished their examinations. He waited until she looked up. "The bank has one final question." Sarah adjusted the blanket around her son. "What is it?" "They wish to know whether you intend to exercise your voting authority at the upcoming special shareholders meeting." Sarah looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms. For several long moments, she said nothing. Then she answered with complete calm, "Not yet." James appeared mildly surprised. "They're expecting instructions. They'll receive them." "When?" Sarah gently kissed her son's forehead. "When I have every document." James understood. She still wasn't interested in revenge. She wanted certainty, evidence, facts. Only then would she act. Outside the hospital, the rain that had fallen all morning finally began to clear. Inside the boardroom, Michael believed he had successfully protected the company. Inside the maternity ward, Sarah quietly welcomed the child who would forever change both of their lives. Neither of them yet realized that the next battle would not be fought with raised voices. It would be fought with record signatures, emails, and the law. Michael Davis did not leave the boardroom until nearly 8 o'clock that evening. The city outside had already surrendered to darkness. Office lights reflected against the rain-soaked streets below, and the steady hum of traffic echoed between the downtown buildings. He loosened his tie as he stepped into the executive elevator, finally pulling his phone from his jacket pocket. 23 missed calls. Most came from the hospital. Several were from unknown numbers. One was from Dr. Emily Foster. His heartbeat quickened. He called the hospital immediately. The maternity nurse answered after the second ring. "Harbor Medical Center Maternity Unit. This is Michael Davis. My wife, Sarah Davis, was admitted this morning." There was a brief pause as the nurse verified the information. "Congratulations, Mr. Davis." Michael frowned. "Congratulations. You have a healthy baby boy." For several seconds, he said nothing. He's already here." "Yes, sir. He was born this afternoon." Michael leaned against the elevator wall. "What time?" "A little after 3. He slowly closed his eyes. "I'll be there immediately." By the time he reached the hospital, visiting hours had nearly ended. The maternity floor had grown quiet. The hurried footsteps and urgent voices from earlier had disappeared, replaced by dimmed lights and whispered conversations between nurses changing shifts. Grace Miller recognized him the moment he stepped off the elevator. "You finally made it." Michael heard the sentence. He also heard what remained unspoken. "I was in meetings." Grace nodded politely. "I'm sure you were." She neither criticized nor excused him. She simply pointed toward Sarah's room. "Mother and baby are doing well." Michael thanked her quietly before approaching the partially open door. Inside, Sarah sat upright in bed with her son asleep against her chest. A small bedside lamp cast a warm glow across the room. Neither television nor phone disturbed the silence. Only the baby's slow breathing filled the space. Sarah looked up as Michael entered. For a moment, neither spoke. Michael stepped closer. I'm sorry. Sarah studied his face. You missed his birth. I know. I tried to finish as quickly as I could. She nodded once. I know. The simplicity of her response unsettled him more than anger would have. He expected accusations. Instead, Sarah carefully lifted the baby. Would you like to hold your son? Michael hesitated before extending his arms. The newborn looked impossibly small beneath the hospital blanket. His tiny fingers instinctively wrapped around Michael's thumb. For the first time in months, Michael forgot entirely about quarterly earnings board resolutions and shareholder votes. Nothing inside the boardroom compared to this moment. He's beautiful, Michael whispered. Sarah smiled faintly. Yes. Another silence followed. This one felt different, not hostile, simply unfamiliar. Michael searched for words. I should have stayed. Sarah looked toward the sleeping child. That decision belongs to yesterday. I made the wrong one. She didn't answer. Some truths required no confirmation. After several minutes, Dr. Emily Foster entered, carrying the latest medical chart. She greeted Michael professionally. I'm glad you could come. I should have been here sooner. Emily looked directly at him. Yes. Her honesty carried no anger, only fact. She reviewed Sarah's recovery before explaining the baby's condition. Because he arrived early, we'll observe him carefully for the next few days. Will he be all right? I expect so. Michael released a quiet breath. Thank you. Emily closed the chart. I'll let you enjoy some time together. After she left, the room became quiet again. Michael remained beside the bed until nearly midnight. When he finally kissed Sarah goodbye, she simply wished him a safe drive home. She did not ask where he would be tomorrow. She already knew. The following morning, Davis Biotech resumed business as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Executive assistants scheduled meetings. Department heads reviewed production targets. Analysts prepared presentations. Only Benjamin Carter noticed Michael looked unusually exhausted. You should go home. Michael shook his head. I've already missed enough. Benjamin almost smiled. That sentence worries me. Michael frowned. What do you mean? Benjamin closed the office door before answering. It concerns me that you're beginning to measure everything by absence. Michael leaned back. The company needs me. So does your family. I can manage both. Benjamin remained silent for several moments. Then he changed subjects. I've completed another legal review. Michael sighed quietly. More shareholder issues. Yes. Benjamin handed over a thick folder. The consulting agreements approved over the past 6 months deserve closer examination. Michael flipped through several pages. Daniel already explained those. I know. Do you believe he's hiding something? Benjamin answered carefully. I believe explanations should be verified. Michael placed the folder aside. I'll review it later. Benjamin noticed the unopened documents. He had seen this pattern before. Urgent matters repeatedly became tomorrow's priorities. Tomorrow eventually became too late. Across the city, Sarah remained inside the hospital recovering. The baby slept peacefully inside the bassinet beside her bed. James Whitmore arrived shortly after breakfast, carrying another collection of documents. I have everything you requested. Sarah accepted the folder. Thank you. Inside were certified bank statements covering the previous 18 months, corporate expense summaries, vendor payment records, shareholder communications, Most people would have found the paperwork painfully dull. Sarah examined each page with remarkable patience. She wasn't searching for dramatic revelations. She was searching for consistency. Several transactions immediately attracted her attention. Large consulting payments, repeated transfers between affiliated companies, professional service invoices approved without competitive review. Nothing individually proved misconduct. Together, they suggested a pattern. James watched quietly. "What do you see?" Sarah compared 2 dates. "This consulting firm." James leaned closer. "Sterling Strategic Advisors. They received 3 payments." "Correct." She pointed toward another page. "And this company." "Horizon Business Solutions." "Same amount." James nodded. "Yes." Sarah continued. "Registered 4 days apart." James looked toward her. "You noticed." She reached for another document. "Same mailing address." James slowly smiled. "So did our investigators." Sarah looked up. "You've already begun verifying." "I followed your instructions. No assumptions. Only records." James opened another folder. "Our investigators visited the address. And they found a shared office suite." Sarah remained expressionless. "Occupied?" "Barely. No employees. 1 receptionist." "Any indication of actual consulting work?" James answered quietly. "None so far." Sarah made another note inside Richard's notebook. "Verify beneficial ownership." James observed her handwriting. "You still aren't drawing conclusions." "Facts first." He had represented corporate clients for nearly 30 years. Very few possessed Sarah's discipline. Many wanted immediate confrontation. She wanted certainty. That afternoon, another package arrived from the Trust's private bank. Unlike previous correspondence, this envelope carried special handling instructions. Inside rested the complete shareholder distribution report. Sarah unfolded the document slowly. The ownership percentages confirmed what she already knew. The Davis Family Investment Trust held 54.8% of all voting shares. Institutional investors collectively held 26%. Executives owned only small individual portions. Michael himself controlled less than 4%. Sarah stared at the numbers for a long time. James finally broke the silence. "Legally speaking, every major corporate decision depends on you." She closed the report. "I wish it didn't. But it does." She looked toward her sleeping son. "I never wanted Michael to work for me. He doesn't. He simply doesn't know it." James nodded. "And that ignorance is becoming dangerous." Sarah understood exactly what he meant. Every document arriving from the company painted the same picture. Michael believed he was making independent executive decisions. In reality, he was approving transactions that ultimately required the confidence of the very shareholder whose trust he was unknowingly risking. Late that evening, after James left the hospital, Sarah remained awake long after the nurses dimmed the lights. The baby slept peacefully beside her. Richard's notebook rested open across her lap. She reviewed every page from the beginning. Dates, contracts, questions, email references, financial transfers. No accusations, only evidence. She reached the final blank page. For the first time since beginning the notebook months earlier, she wrote something different. Not a transaction, not a reminder, just one quiet sentence. The truth should never depend on anger. She closed the notebook. Outside the hospital window, Seattle's lights shimmered beneath another curtain of rain. Inside Davis Biotech headquarters, Daniel Brooks remained alone in his office reviewing financial schedules that no auditor had yet questioned. Rebecca Collins prepared another strategy presentation for the upcoming special shareholders meeting. Benjamin Carter organized copies of every legal warning he had issued over the previous year. Michael believed the difficult days were finally behind him now that his son had been born. He did not yet realize that Sarah had begun assembling something far more powerful than an argument. She was assembling a complete documented history. And history, when supported by records instead of emotion, rarely needed anyone to raise their voice. 3 days after her son's birth, Sarah Davis left Harbor Medical Center just after sunrise. Seattle welcomed her with cool air and a pale silver sky. James Whitmore loaded 2 small suitcases into his sedan, while Nurse Grace Miller carefully helped Sarah settle the baby into his car seat. Grace smiled warmly. "I hope the next time we meet, it won't be in a hospital." "So do I," Sarah replied. Grace looked down at the sleeping infant. "He's stronger every day. Thank you for everything." Grace hesitated before embracing Sarah gently. "You never complained." Sarah smiled softly. "It wouldn't have changed anything." Grace stepped back, watching the car disappear into the quiet morning traffic. During 11 years as a maternity nurse, she had witnessed countless families celebrate the beginning of new lives. Yet Sarah's calm dignity after being abandoned during labor remained one of the moments she knew she would never forget. Instead of returning to the house she shared with Michael, Sarah asked James to drive north toward Mercer Island. The property waiting there had once belonged to her father. Richard Davis had purchased the lakeside home more than 20 years earlier, preferring its privacy over the attention that accompanied luxury neighborhoods in downtown Seattle. After his death, the house had remained almost untouched. Its hardwood floors still carried the faint scent of cedar. The study still contained shelves filled with financial history law books and handwritten journals. Even Richard's reading glasses remained neatly folded beside his favorite leather chair. Sarah stood silently in the doorway, holding her son. "It still feels like he's here." James nodded. Some places refused to forget. A housekeeper named Margaret Ellis emerged from the kitchen. Margaret had worked for Richard for nearly 15 years before choosing to stay on after his passing. When she saw Sarah carrying the baby, tears immediately filled her eyes. "Oh, Miss Sarah." Sarah smiled. "You can call me Sarah. I've tried for 10 years. They laughed quietly. Margaret carefully welcomed the newborn before leading Sarah upstairs to the master bedroom. Everything had already been prepared. Fresh linens, a nursery, flowers, meals waiting in the refrigerator. James looked around approvingly. "I thought you'd be more comfortable here." You were right. Unlike the modern downtown apartment, Michael preferred this home carried warmth rather than prestige. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt able to breathe. Meanwhile, Michael returned to an empty apartment that evening. He noticed Sarah's hospital bag was gone. So were several baby supplies. A short note rested on the kitchen counter. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. "James brought us to my father's house. The baby needs quiet while he grows stronger. You may visit whenever you wish. Please call first so we can arrange a suitable time. No accusations, no demands, no mention of the hospital." Michael read the note twice. Its kindness unsettled him more than anger ever could. He immediately reached for his phone. Sarah answered after several rings. "Hello? I just saw your note. I thought you would. Are you coming home?" There was a brief pause. "I'm home." He understood exactly what she meant. "Can I see him tomorrow?" "Of course." "What time?" "Whenever you're finished working." Michael closed his eyes. "I'll come earlier." "I hope you do." The call ended peacefully. Yet after placing the phone down, Michael found himself standing alone in complete silence. For the first time since launching Davis Biotech, his apartment no longer felt like success. It felt empty. The following Monday, James Whitmore arrived at the Mercer Island house carrying 2 new boxes of documents. "I've hired an independent forensic accounting firm." Sarah looked up from the baby's crib. "They've started already. They began the morning after your message from the hospital." She nodded. "What have they found?" James opened the first box. Nothing conclusive. "And they're asking excellent questions." Sarah smiled faintly. "Good." Inside the files rested thousands of pages. Wire transfers, vendor invoices, corporate contracts, executive expense reports, digital payment authorizations. James continued. "I instructed them exactly as you requested. No assumptions. No assumptions. No opinions. Only evidence." Sarah appreciated that. She refused to build legal action upon suspicion. Every allegation would eventually require proof. Every document would eventually face examination. Every conclusion would eventually appear before judges, regulators, or shareholders. Anything less than certainty would only weaken the truth. Across downtown Seattle, another meeting unfolded inside Davis Biotech. Benjamin Carter entered the executive conference room carrying a thick binder. Daniel Brooks noticed immediately. "You've brought homework." Benjamin ignored the joke. "I've completed another compliance review." Rebecca Collins sighed. Again, Benjamin calmly distributed copies. "The consulting agreements from Sterling Strategic Advisors require additional documentation." Daniel barely glanced at the papers. "The invoices are complete." "The invoices exist." Daniel smiled. "Isn't that the same thing?" "No." Benjamin folded his hands. "I requested evidence showing services actually performed." Rebecca answered smoothly. "The reports were delivered electronically. I've searched company archives. And I found no reports." Daniel leaned back comfortably. "Perhaps they were deleted." Benjamin met his eyes. "Perhaps." Michael listened quietly. His lack of enthusiasm surprised everyone. Rebecca noticed first. "You seem distracted." "My son came home today." Rebecca smiled politely. "Congratulations." Daniel added, "You'll adjust." Michael nodded. "I suppose." Yet his thoughts remained elsewhere. He remembered Sarah standing alone in the hospital. He remembered Grace saying, "You finally made it?" The sentence continued echoing inside his mind. Benjamin interrupted his thoughts. "I recommend delaying approval until we verify the consulting work." Daniel immediately objected. "We'll lose weeks. We may avoid legal exposure." Rebecca looked toward Michael. "Your decision." Michael hesitated, only briefly. Then old habits returned. "Proceed." Benjamin slowly closed his binder. "As you wish." He made one final note in his legal file. Recommendation declined. That afternoon, Olivia Parker organized executive correspondence outside Michael's office. While filing archived emails, she noticed something unusual. Several message chains involving Daniel contained attachments that no longer opened. She assumed the files had become corrupted. Still, company policy required damaged records to be reported. She forwarded the issue to information technology. A routine action. Nothing more. Or so she believed. Within the hour, the IT department responded. The attachments had not been corrupted. They had been manually removed. Olivia frowned. Removed by whom? The system log displayed administrative authorization. She printed the report without fully understanding its importance. Instead of delivering it immediately, she placed it inside a folder labeled Pending Review. One small decision, one forgotten document. another piece of a puzzle quietly assembling itself. Back at the Mercer Island house, Sarah spent the evening rocking her son beside the large living room window overlooking Lake Washington. The baby slept peacefully after feeding. Margaret prepared tea before quietly leaving the room. James reviewed financial records across the dining table. Neither interrupted the silence. Eventually, Sarah spoke. "My father used to say companies don't collapse in a single day." James looked up. "They don't. They collapse one ignored warning at a time." James smiled. "That sounds exactly like Richard." "It is." She gently adjusted the blanket covering her son. "I think Michael is ignoring warnings." "I think so too. But I still don't know whether he's dishonest or simply trusting the wrong people." James completed the sentence. Sarah nodded. "That's why we keep gathering facts." James leaned back thoughtfully. Many clients would already be preparing lawsuits. "I'm not interested in punishment. What are you interested in?" She looked down at her sleeping child. "The truth." James believed her completely. That single word explained every decision she had made since leaving the hospital. No public confrontation, no emotional speeches, no leaked documents, no revenge, only patience, only evidence, only law. Outside, darkness settled across the lake. Inside Davis Biotech, Daniel Brooks remained alone after everyone else had gone home. He opened the confidential spreadsheet hidden deep within an encrypted folder. Another transfer had cleared successfully. Another consulting invoice had been approved. Another trail had grown longer. He smiled to himself. As long as no one connected the transactions, the system would continue working exactly as designed. Across the city, Sarah closed Richard's notebook after adding 3 more documented observations. She had no idea that Olivia's forgotten folder, Benjamin's growing legal file, James's forensic accountants, and Daniel's hidden spreadsheet were all moving toward the same destination. The difference was simple. Daniel believed no one was watching. Sarah had been watching for months, and with every quiet day that passed, the distance between suspicion and proof grew smaller. 1 week after Sarah Davis left the hospital, the first complete forensic report arrived at James Whitmore's office. It was nearly 200 pages long. There were no dramatic conclusions on the cover, no accusations, no highlighted scandals, only a simple title: Independent Financial Review, Preliminary Findings. James preferred reports written that way. Facts carried more weight when they did not need emotional language. He called Sarah immediately. "It has arrived." "I'll come." "You don't need to. I'll bring it." "Thank you." Less than an hour later, James entered Richard Davis's old study overlooking Lake Washington. Morning sunlight reflected gently across the water, while Sarah sat near the window with her sleeping son resting peacefully in a bassinet beside her. The room looked almost exactly as Richard had left it years earlier. Rows of legal textbooks lined the walls. Family photographs remained untouched. A brass desk clock ticked quietly. James placed the report onto the large oak desk. Our accountants were extremely careful. Sarah opened the first page. "What did they find?" James answered with characteristic restraint. "They didn't prove fraud." She looked up. "But they found enough irregularities to justify a full investigation." Sarah slowly turned each page. The report outlined dozens of consulting contracts approved during the previous 18 months. Several companies shared nearly identical mailing addresses. Invoice amounts repeatedly ended in identical figures. Approval timelines followed suspiciously similar patterns. More importantly, investigators found almost no evidence that the consulting firms had actually produced the extensive work for which they had been paid. Sarah remained silent. She reached for a pencil rather than a pen. Richard had always insisted that preliminary observations should be written in pencil. Facts might remain. Conclusions could change. She circled several contract numbers. Then she asked, "Did they trace the payments?" James nodded. "As far as banking records legally allow." "And?" "The money moved through multiple corporate accounts." "Final destination?" "Still unknown?" Sarah closed the report. "Continue." "No shareholder action?" "Not yet." James had expected exactly that answer. Most controlling shareholders would already be demanding emergency meetings. Sarah wanted certainty before authority. Across downtown Seattle, another important envelope reached Davis Biotech headquarters. Olivia Parker sorted the morning mail before placing a cream-colored package on Michael's desk. "Special delivery." Michael glanced at the return address. Northern Trust Corporate Services. He frowned slightly. They rarely write directly. Olivia nodded. "It appears to concern the upcoming shareholders meeting." Michael opened the envelope. Inside was a formal notification. A special shareholders meeting would take place in 3 weeks. Attendance by all executive officers was mandatory. The controlling shareholder intended to exercise full voting rights. Michael read the sentence twice, then a third time. His expression changed. For years, the majority shareholder had remained completely silent. Now suddenly they intended to appear. Rebecca Collins entered moments later. "You've seen it." Michael handed her the letter. She scanned the contents quickly. "This changes things." Daniel Brooks joined them a few minutes later. After reading the notice, he forced a calm expression. "I'm sure it's routine." Benjamin Carter happened to overhear the conversation while passing the office. He stepped inside. "Nothing about this is routine." Michael looked toward him. "What do you think it means?" Benjamin answered honestly. "It means the controlling shareholder wants to be seen." Rebecca folded her arms. "Perhaps they're simply introducing themselves." Benjamin shook his head slightly. "People who remain invisible for years rarely emerge without a reason." The room fell quiet. Daniel broke the silence. "We should prepare an updated presentation." Rebecca agreed, "and emphasize long-term growth." Michael nodded. "Let's assume they support management." Benjamin quietly replied, "Let's assume nothing." That afternoon, Sarah sat with James reviewing another collection of documents. This time, they focused on corporate governance rather than finances. James spread several certified records across the table. "These are your shareholder rights." Sarah skimmed the familiar pages. "I remember." "You also have responsibilities." "I know." James pointed toward one section. "As controlling shareholder, you may request independent audits." "Already completed." "You may nominate new directors." Sarah remained silent. "You may remove existing leadership through lawful procedure." She looked toward the window. "I hope it doesn't come to that." James did not answer. Hope had become increasingly fragile. Later that evening, another visitor arrived. Margaret Ellis opened the front door to Benjamin Carter. The company's general counsel looked slightly uncomfortable standing on the front porch. "I hope I'm not intruding." Margaret invited him inside before informing Sarah. When Sarah entered the study, Benjamin stood respectfully. "Thank you for seeing me. I wasn't expecting you." "I know." Sarah offered him a seat. "What brings you here?" Benjamin hesitated. "I came as a lawyer." "Not as Michael's attorney." "No. As an officer of the court." Sarah appreciated the distinction. Benjamin removed a sealed envelope. I cannot disclose confidential company strategy. I wouldn't ask you to. But I can advise you of your legal rights as a shareholder. Sarah accepted the envelope without opening it. You know? Benjamin nodded once. I've suspected for years. You never confirmed. It wasn't my place. Sarah smiled faintly. My father trusted your judgment. I respected his. Benjamin looked directly at her. I also respected your decision to remain invisible. She asked quietly, Do you still? Benjamin answered, after careful thought, I respect it. But I no longer believe it protects the company. The words lingered in the room. Sarah understood. Benjamin continued, I have repeatedly advised management to obtain proper shareholder approval. They ignored you. They delayed. There's a difference. Benjamin almost smiled. Legally, yes. He reached into his briefcase once more. I can't give you privileged company documents. I understand. But I can tell you something. Sarah waited. I've written 4 formal legal warnings during the past year. And everyone was documented. Sarah nodded slowly. Thank you. Benjamin stood. I believe events are moving faster now. So do I. As he reached the door, he paused. One more thing. Sarah looked up. The special shareholders meeting. Yes. Everyone expects an anonymous investor. Benjamin smiled politely. No one expects you. After he left, Sarah remained thoughtful for a long time. She finally opened the sealed envelope. Inside was nothing confidential. Only copies of public corporate bylaws with several passages highlighted. Benjamin had found a lawful way to remind her exactly how much authority already belonged to her. The following morning, Davis Biotech held another executive strategy session. Rebecca projected slides outlining presentation plans for the upcoming meeting. We need confidence. Daniel added, we need stability. Michael looked toward the screen. We also need answers. Rebecca turned. About what? The shareholder. Daniel immediately responded. We've operated successfully for years. Michael wasn't satisfied. Who owns more than half my company? No one answered. Rebecca finally said, The trust office has always maintained confidentiality. Michael leaned back slowly. It feels strange. Benjamin quietly replied, It should. Michael glanced toward him. You knew this day would come. Benjamin answered honestly, I knew silence never lasts forever. Meanwhile, Olivia Parker received another response from the IT department. The deleted email attachments she had reported earlier had been restored from secure backup servers. Curious, she opened one of the recovered files. Instead of consulting reports, the attachment contained only a scanned invoice. No research, no recommendations, no detailed analysis, just a request for payment. She frowned. Had someone attached the wrong file? She opened another. The same result. Then another. Again, no consulting work. Only invoices. Olivia quietly printed several examples before locking them inside her desk drawer. She wasn't accusing anyone. She simply believed someone should eventually ask why millions of dollars had been approved with almost no supporting documentation. That evening, Sarah carried her son onto the back porch overlooking the lake. The sun dipped behind the distant mountains, painting the water in soft shades of gold and blue. Her son slept peacefully against her shoulder. Margaret watched from the kitchen window. James organized documents inside the study. Benjamin returned to his office downtown. Michael reviewed presentation slides late into the night. Daniel adjusted financial schedules. Rebecca rehearsed shareholder talking points. Each believed they were preparing for the same meeting. In reality, they were preparing for entirely different futures. Only Sarah knew that when the boardroom doors finally opened, she would not arrive as a guest. She would arrive as the person whose signature carried more legal authority than everyone else in the room combined. And for the first time since the day Michael left the hospital, she quietly decided that when the meeting began, she would no longer remain invisible. The morning of the special shareholders meeting arrived beneath a clear Seattle sky. For the first time in weeks, the rain had disappeared. Sunlight reflected from the glass exterior of Davis Biotech headquarters, making the building appear brighter than usual. Television crews were absent, but several financial reporters waited near the entrance after learning that the company's long silent controlling shareholder intended to appear in person. No one knew who that person was. Rumors had circulated for years. Some believed the shares belonged to a retired venture capitalist. Others insisted an international investment fund had quietly accumulated control through dozens of shell companies. One business columnist even suggested that the owner had died years earlier and that trustees simply continued voting in silence. No one guessed the truth. Michael Davis arrived shortly after 8 o'clock. He paused briefly in the lobby before taking the executive elevator to the top floor. Daniel Brooks was already waiting inside the boardroom. So far, everything is calm. Michael loosened his jacket. Any word from the trust? Daniel shook his head. Nothing. Rebecca Collins entered carrying several presentation folders. We're ready. Benjamin Carter followed more quietly, placing 2 thick legal binders beside his chair. Michael noticed them. You came prepared, Benjamin answered calmly. I always do. One by one, the remaining directors entered. Harold Bennett, Susan Reynolds, Thomas Green, outside auditors, independent legal observers, representatives from the company's transfer agent. Even the corporate secretary had arranged additional seating along the wall. Attendance exceeded every previous shareholders' meeting. Everyone expected history. No one knew what kind. Across the city, Sarah Davis finished fastening her infant son's blanket inside a carefully chosen child carrier. Margaret Ellis adjusted the tiny blue cap covering the baby's head. He'll be warm. Sarah smiled. Thank you. James Whitmore entered carrying 2 leather document cases. Everything is ready. Sarah looked toward the staircase. Let's go. Margaret hesitated. Are you certain you want to bring him? Sarah gently touched her son's tiny hand. He belongs with me. James understood. This was not symbolism. The child simply could not yet be separated from his mother for long. The black sedan waiting outside pulled quietly away from the lakeside house. No dramatic music accompanied the journey. No hurried conversation filled the silence. Sarah spent most of the drive looking out the window, while her son slept peacefully. James reviewed the meeting agenda one final time. When the chairman recognizes you, I'll introduce myself. No speeches. No? No unnecessary explanations. Sarah nodded. Only facts. James smiled slightly. Richard would be proud. Sarah looked down at her son. I hope so. Back inside Davis Biotech, the meeting officially began at 9:30. Harold Bennett welcomed everyone before reviewing procedural matters, corporate governance, voting requirements, conflict disclosures, legal formalities. Everything followed standard procedure. Everything except one item. The final participant has not yet arrived. Harold glanced toward the corporate secretary. Have we received confirmation? The secretary checked her phone. Yes. They're downstairs. A quiet murmur spread across the room. Michael looked toward Daniel. Daniel merely shrugged. Rebecca maintained her confident smile. Benjamin closed one legal binder and folded his hands. He already knew, not with certainty, but with enough confidence to remain completely calm. Moments later, the conference room doors opened. Everyone instinctively turned. James Whitmore entered first. Several directors immediately recognized him. Whispers moved across the room. "That's Richard Davis's attorney." "Why is he here?" "Who invited him?" James stepped aside. Sarah Davis entered. She wore a simple navy business suit beneath a light cream coat. No expensive jewelry, no dramatic entrance, no expression of triumph. Her infant son rested peacefully against her chest inside a soft carrier. For several seconds, absolute silence filled the boardroom. Michael stared without moving. His mind struggled to understand what he was seeing. "Sarah." His voice barely rose above a whisper. She met his eyes. "Good morning." Daniel frowned. Rebecca looked genuinely confused. Linda Davis, attending as a family shareholder, slowly stood from her chair. "What is this?" James calmly approached the front of the room. "Mr. Chairman?" Harold Bennett nodded respectfully. "Mr. Whitmore, I represent the Davis Family Investment Trust." Every conversation stopped. James placed a sealed packet before the chairman. "Inside are certified ownership records, bank confirmations, trust certifications, probate documents, and shareholder authorization establishing beneficial ownership." Harold carefully opened the file. The corporate secretary stepped beside him. Several minutes passed while every document was examined. No one interrupted. Finally, Harold looked toward the transfer agent. "Can you verify these records?" The representative reviewed the documentation electronically before answering. "Confirmed." Harold turned another page. "And voting authority?" "Confirmed." "The beneficial owner?" The representative looked toward Sarah. "Sarah Davis." The words settled over the room with extraordinary weight. Michael blinked several times. "No." No one answered. He looked toward Sarah again. "You?" James spoke quietly. "My client has held beneficial ownership through the Davis Family Investment Trust since the completion of Richard Davis's estate." Michael looked confused. "Richard," Sarah answered herself. "My father." "You never told me?" "No." "Why?" She looked at him calmly. "Because I wanted you to build your company, believing your success belonged to you." Michael struggled to speak. "Our company." Sarah did not correct him. She simply remained silent. Harold Bennett continued reviewing the documents. "The trust owns," he paused briefly, "54.8% of all voting shares." Several directors exchanged astonished looks. Rebecca slowly lowered her presentation folder. Daniel's face lost its usual composure for the first time. Linda whispered, "Impossible." Benjamin quietly replied, "No." Everyone looked toward him. "It is entirely possible." Michael remained standing. "You've owned the company all this time," Sarah answered gently. "I've owned the controlling shares." "Why keep it secret?" "Because I believed leadership should be earned." His voice grew softer. "And now the shareholders deserve transparency." James stepped forward once more. "My client has requested that today's agenda proceed exactly as scheduled." Harold looked surprised. "No changes?" "None." Rebecca immediately relaxed. "If that's the case, we'd be pleased to present." Sarah interrupted for the first time. "Before management presents." Her voice remained remarkably calm. "I have one procedural request." Harold nodded. "Go ahead." I request that all supporting financial records, consulting agreements, banking summaries, audit materials, executive correspondence, and governance memoranda referenced during today's presentations be entered into the official meeting record. The room became silent again. Daniel answered first. That's unnecessary. Sarah looked toward him. It is required. Benjamin quietly opened one of his binders. It is. Daniel frowned. We've never done that. Benjamin responded evenly. We've also never had the controlling shareholder attend in person. Harold considered the request only briefly. The request is granted. The corporate secretary immediately recorded the ruling. Sarah thanked him with a simple nod. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply adjusted the blanket covering her sleeping son. Michael watched her in disbelief. For years, he had mistaken her silence for distance. He had mistaken her patience for passivity. He had mistaken her kindness for dependence. Now, sitting quietly across the table without raising her voice, Sarah possessed more authority than every executive in the room combined. Yet, she showed none of it through pride, only restraint. James placed another folder before the chairman. My client has also retained independent counsel and independent forensic accountants. Daniel's eyes widened. Rebecca stopped taking notes. Michael slowly looked toward Benjamin. You knew. Benjamin answered honestly. I suspected. You never told me. It wasn't my secret. Michael lowered his eyes. For the first time since entering the building that morning, he realized the meeting no longer belonged to management. It belonged to the shareholders. And above all, it belonged to the quiet woman he had left alone in a hospital only days earlier. The presentations had not yet begun. The evidence had not yet been introduced. No accusations had been spoken. But every person in the room could already feel the balance of power shifting, not because Sarah demanded it, because the law had recognized it long before anyone else did. No one spoke for several seconds after Harold Bennett approved Sarah's procedural request. The silence did not come from confusion alone. It came from realization. For years, executives had treated shareholder meetings as formalities. Presentations were polished, questions were predictable, and resolutions usually passed with little debate. The controlling shareholder had always remained invisible. Today, the invisible had taken a seat at the table. Harold adjusted his glasses before looking toward Michael. Mr. Davis, unless there are objections, management may proceed. Michael slowly stood. For perhaps the first time in his career, he felt uncertain inside his own boardroom. He glanced briefly towards Sarah. She offered no expression of challenge. She simply waited. Michael cleared his throat. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The presentation began exactly as Rebecca had rehearsed. Slides displayed revenue growth, international expansion, research partnerships, future acquisitions, projected earnings. Investors around the table watched attentively. Michael spoke confidently, but those who knew him well noticed small differences. He turned pages more slowly. He paused more often. His eyes occasionally drifted towards Sarah before returning to the screen. She never interrupted. Instead, she quietly made handwritten notes inside Richard's old leather notebook. No one could see what she wrote. After nearly 40 minutes, Michael concluded. That summarizes management's strategic outlook. Harold nodded. Thank you. He turned toward Sarah. As controlling shareholder, do you have any questions? Sarah closed her notebook gently. Yes. Only one word. Yet every person in the room immediately became attentive. She looked toward Daniel Brooks. Mr. Brooks. Daniel straightened in his chair. Yes. During the previous 18 months, Davis Biotech approved consulting agreements totaling approximately $43 million. Daniel answered without hesitation. Correct. Sarah continued calmly. How were those consultants selected? Daniel smiled politely. They possessed specialized expertise. Sarah nodded. Could you identify the services each firm provided? Daniel opened one of his folders. Our records describe advisory support related to market expansion. Sarah asked another question. Could those advisory reports be entered into today's official record? Daniel hesitated for the first time. Rebecca immediately responded. They're archived. Benjamin quietly spoke. I searched the archives. Everyone looked toward him. I located invoices. He paused. I did not locate supporting reports. Daniel's expression remained composed. They may exist elsewhere. Sarah nodded once. Then perhaps today's meeting would be an appropriate opportunity to produce them. Daniel looked toward his assistant. No one moved. The silence answered the question before anyone spoke. Harold made a note. Management will provide the supporting reports before the meeting concludes. Sarah turned another page inside her notebook. Her attention shifted toward Rebecca Collins. Miss Collins. Rebecca smiled professionally. Yes. You recommended several strategic consulting contracts. I did. What criteria determine performance? Rebecca answered carefully. The consulting relationships produced measurable growth. Sarah tilted her head slightly. Measured by which reports? Rebecca hesitated. Our internal assessments. Sarah remained calm. May those assessments also be entered into today's record? Rebecca glanced briefly toward Daniel. I'll have to locate them. Benjamin quietly added, I've been requesting those assessments for 6 months. Several independent directors exchanged concerned looks. Harold looked toward Rebecca. Please include those documents. She nodded. Of course. Sarah asked no further questions. Instead, she turned toward James Whitmore. James stood. Mr. Chairman. Harold recognized him immediately. Go ahead. My client requests permission to distribute independently verified financial summaries prepared from publicly available corporate records and certified banking documents. Daniel objected instantly. We haven't reviewed those materials. James remained composed. They are based upon your own filings. Benjamin looked toward Harold. There is no procedural objection. Harold nodded. Permission granted. James distributed identical folders around the room. Every director received one. Every observer received one. Michael accepted his copy with visible uncertainty. Across the front appeared a simple title. Comparative Financial Review. No dramatic language, no accusations, only numbers. Sarah waited while everyone opened the folders. The first pages compared consulting expenditures over 3 fiscal years. The second compared vendor concentration. The third identified recurring payment structures. Every figure matched Davis Biotech's own filings. Only the arrangement differed. Patterns became visible. Thomas Green, one of the independent directors, looked up first. These 3 consulting firms, James answered. Yes. They share identical payment schedules. Correct. Susan Reynolds flipped several pages. They also received approval within unusually short time frames. James nodded. They did. Daniel finally spoke. That doesn't prove misconduct. Sarah answered quietly. No. The room turned toward her. It doesn't. She folded her hands. It simply raises questions. Her answer surprised several directors. She was not attempting to prove guilt. She was demonstrating that questions deserved answers. Michael continued reading. Another section compared executive expense reimbursements. Nothing appeared illegal, but several approvals bypassed ordinary review procedures. He looked toward Daniel. I don't remember approving exceptions. Daniel answered immediately. You delegated authority. Michael frowned. For individual expenses. Daniel remained calm. The delegation language was broad. Benjamin quietly opened another binder. I advised narrowing that language. Michael slowly turned toward him. You sent memoranda. Benjamin nodded. 4. Michael stared at him. I don't remember reading them. Benjamin answered honestly. I know. The sentence struck Michael harder than criticism. He remembered the unopened folders, the delayed reviews, the promises to read them later. Harold Bennett looked around the room. I believe we should take a short recess. No one objected. People quietly stood. Conversations immediately began in small groups. Some discussed governance. Others compared documents. No one spoke loudly. There was too much uncertainty. Michael remained seated. He watched Sarah walk toward the windows with her sleeping son. She stood looking across Seattle's skyline without speaking to anyone. He approached carefully. Sarah. She turned. Yes. I didn't know. I know. You should have told me. She considered the statement. Would you have listened? Michael opened his mouth. No answer came. She continued gently. When my father died, I wanted you to continue believing every success belonged to your own work. It did. It still does. Then why are we here? Sarah looked down at their son. Because ownership carries responsibility. Michael lowered his voice. Do you believe I stole from the company? Sarah met his eyes. I haven't said that. But you suspect it. I suspect the company deserves answers. He noticed something remarkable. She had never once accused him personally. Not in the hospital, not today, not even now. Every sentence focused on evidence, on responsibility. On governance? Never revenge. Across the room, Daniel quietly approached Rebecca. This isn't going as planned. Rebecca kept her voice low. We stay calm. They have accountants. We expected questions. They also have banking records. Rebecca looked toward James. How? Daniel answered without confidence. I don't know. For the first time since joining Davis Biotech, Daniel felt something unfamiliar. Not fear, exposure. Meanwhile, Olivia Parker quietly entered carrying several additional folders. She approached Benjamin. I think you should see these. Benjamin opened the first folder. Inside rested printed copies of the restored email attachments. Invoices, approval requests. No consulting reports. He looked toward Olivia. Where did these come from? The backup server. Were they altered? No. Benjamin carefully closed the folder. You've done the right thing. Olivia looked nervous. I don't know what they mean. Benjamin answered honestly. Neither do I. He paused. But they matter. He carried the folder directly to Harold Bennett. The chairman reviewed several pages before placing them beside the other meeting exhibits. The official record continued growing. Email logs, financial summaries, corporate bylaws, governance memoranda, bank certifications, invoices. No dramatic confrontations, no shouting, only documents, only evidence, only procedure. As everyone slowly returned to their seats after the recess, the atmosphere inside the boardroom had completely changed. Earlier that morning, Management expected to present ambitious plans for the future. Now, the future itself had paused. Before any expansion could continue, before any new vote could be taken, the company first needed to understand its own past. Sarah quietly returned to her seat. She adjusted the blanket covering her son and placed Richard's notebook beside the growing stack of evidence. She had still spoken fewer than 24 sentences since entering the room. Yet, with every document added to the record, her silence carried greater authority than anyone else's speeches. And the most important evidence had not yet been presented. When the meeting resumed, the atmosphere inside the boardroom no longer resembled the confident gathering that had begun earlier that morning. No one reached for coffee. No one checked a phone. Even the quiet rustling of paper seemed unusually loud. The polished presentation slides that Rebecca Collins had prepared with such care remained frozen on the screen, forgotten. Instead, every set of eyes turned toward Harold Bennett. The chairman adjusted the agenda before speaking. Given the materials now entered into the record, the board will hear from the independent auditors. The representatives from Northbridge Audit Group stood together. Their lead partner, Karen Mitchell, placed a thick report on the table before opening a prepared statement. Our firm was retained 6 weeks ago to perform a limited compliance review relating to vendor payments governance procedures and financial authorization controls. She spoke without emotion, neither dramatic nor defensive, exactly as auditors were trained to do. We have not completed a full forensic investigation. Daniel Brooks leaned forward immediately. So no conclusions have been reached. Karen looked directly at him. Not final conclusions. The distinction mattered. She continued. However, we have identified several findings that require immediate attention. The projector switched from management's presentation to the audit report. A spreadsheet appeared. Rows of transactions, vendor names, approval dates, payment references. Karen pointed toward the first section. Between March of last year and August of this year, 3 consulting firms received a combined $43,200,000. Everyone already knew the figure. The next slide mattered more. The payment timeline. Colored lines connected each consulting company to the same commercial office address. Thomas Green frowned. They all operated from one building, Karen answered. Yes, Rebecca spoke calmly. Shared office buildings are common. They are, Karen agreed. But our investigators found only one receptionist serving all 3 companies. Daniel folded his arms. That proves nothing. Karen nodded. It does not. She clicked to the next slide. There is more. Photographs appeared. Small office doors, empty conference rooms, unoccupied workstations, no laboratories, no research teams, no consulting staff. Susan Reynolds slowly removed her glasses. Was anyone there? Karen answered. One administrative employee. What records did they provide? Billing invoices. Research reports. Karen looked down briefly. None. Silence settled over the room once again. Michael stared at the photographs. He remembered approving those contracts, not because he had inspected them carefully, because Daniel had summarized them. He slowly turned toward his chief financial officer. Did you visit these companies? Daniel answered confidently. No. Did anyone? Rebecca responded before Daniel could continue. The consulting work was largely virtual. Karen acknowledged the possibility. That explanation is possible. She paused. But our review found no documented evidence supporting work performed. Benjamin Carter quietly opened another binder. I requested those documents repeatedly. Michael looked toward him. You did. Benjamin simply nodded. I did. Karen advanced another slide. This section concerns internal approval procedures. A flow chart appeared. Standard corporate policy required multiple reviews before large consulting payments could be authorized. Yet several transactions bypassed ordinary review channels. Karen explained carefully. In these cases, executive delegation authority replaced committee approval. Michael frowned. I authorized delegation. Karen answered. You did? She clicked again. But not necessarily in this form. A scanned authorization document appeared. Michael recognized his signature immediately. So that's the delegation. Karen nodded. Please read the highlighted language. Michael leaned closer. The highlighted paragraph extended far beyond what he remembered approving. His expression slowly changed. I never wrote this. Daniel answered immediately. No one suggested you did. Michael looked toward him. Then how did it appear? Daniel remained composed. The document was revised after legal formatting. Benjamin quietly spoke. I never approved those revisions. Everyone turned toward him. Benjamin removed another file. This is my original draft. He handed copies to the chairman. Then another set to Karen. The comparison required only seconds. The documents shared the same signature page. Everything else differed. Harold Bennett slowly lowered both copies onto the table. Explain this. Daniel hesitated. The legal department updated formatting. Benjamin shook his head. No. I never authorized those changes. Rebecca looked visibly uncomfortable. This may simply be version confusion. Karen answered. Our document analysis indicates the language was inserted after the original draft. Michael stared at the papers in disbelief. Someone had expanded his delegated authority. Someone had used his signature. Whether intentionally or negligently remained unknown. But the difference was undeniable. Sarah remained silent. She made another short note inside Richard's notebook. Version discrepancy confirmed. James noticed. She still refused to write conclusions, only verified observations. Harold looked toward Karen again. Continue. She nodded. The next finding concerns electronic correspondence. Olivia Parker quietly entered from the rear of the room after receiving permission from the chairman. She carried a sealed evidence envelope. Benjamin introduced her. This is Olivia Parker, Executive Assistant to the Chief Executive Officer. Harold nodded. Proceed. Olivia looked understandably nervous. I was organizing archived correspondence last week. She explained discovering the missing email attachments, the IT recovery, the restored backup files, the missing consulting reports. She answered every question honestly. I don't know what any of it means. Karen thanked her. It means the original records deserve closer examination. The recovered attachments appeared on the screen. Invoices, approval requests, payment confirmations. Nothing describing actual consulting work. Michael slowly rubbed his forehead. He remembered approving the invoices. He did not remember receiving supporting reports. Had they existed, or had he simply assumed someone else had reviewed them, the uncertainty became heavier by the minute. Karen displayed one final chart. This timeline compares approval dates. Colored markers appeared. Benjamin's legal memoranda, executive approvals, consulting payments, bank transfers. Every warning preceded another payment. Harold examined the chart carefully. So management continued approving expenditures after receiving legal concerns. Benjamin answered quietly. Yes. Michael looked at him. You should have insisted. Benjamin met his eyes. I advised. You should have stopped me. I had no authority to stop you. Michael lowered his head. The truth hurt because it was simple. Benjamin had warned him. Repeatedly. Michael had chosen speed instead. For several moments, no one spoke. Then Sarah gently closed her notebook. The sound drew everyone's attention. She looked toward Karen. "May I ask one question?" "Of course." Sarah's voice remained calm. "Based upon everything you've reviewed today," Karen waited, "are you accusing anyone of fraud?" Karen answered without hesitation. "No." Daniel released a quiet breath. But Karen continued. "We are identifying transactions requiring a full, independent investigation." Sarah nodded. "Thank you." She asked nothing further. Her question had accomplished exactly what she intended. The meeting remained grounded in evidence rather than accusation. No one could later claim the shareholders had acted emotionally. The record reflected only facts. Harold looked around the room. The board must now determine appropriate next steps. Thomas Green spoke first. "I believe a forensic audit is necessary." Susan Reynolds agreed. "As do I." Another director nodded. "We owe that to every shareholder." Rebecca attempted one final objection. A public investigation could damage investor confidence. Sarah answered quietly. "A hidden problem damages it more." Rebecca looked at her. For several seconds, she found no reply. Michael slowly stood. Every eye followed him. He looked first toward Harold, then Benjamin, finally toward Sarah. His voice sounded different now, not confident, not defeated, simply honest. "If an independent forensic audit is necessary..." He paused. "Then I support it." Daniel looked at him in surprise. "Michael?" He raised one hand gently. "No." The room fell silent. "If I signed documents, I should have examined more carefully." He looked toward the stack of exhibits. "Then that responsibility belongs to me." Sarah watched him quietly. For the first time that day, she saw something she had not seen in many months. Not authority, not ambition, humility. It came too late to erase the past. But perhaps not too late to face it. Harold wrote one final note before addressing the room. "The board will prepare a formal resolution." The vote had not yet been called. No positions had yet changed. No executive had yet been removed. The legal process still lay ahead. But everyone understood that the company had crossed an invisible line. There would be no return to business as usual. The evidence had grown too substantial. The questions had become too serious. And for the first time since entering the boardroom, Michael realized that the greatest danger to his career had never been an unseen shareholder. It had been every warning he had chosen and to read. Fan 12. The resolution required no dramatic speeches. Harold Bennett simply read each provision aloud, one careful sentence at a time. "The board hereby authorizes a full independent forensic audit." No objections. "The board authorizes immediate preservation of all financial records, electronic communications, and executive correspondence related to the consulting agreements identified during today's meeting." Again, no objections. "The board authorizes outside legal counsel to cooperate fully with regulatory authorities, should formal review become necessary." The motion passed unanimously. Even Michael voted in favor. The corporate secretary recorded every vote with meticulous precision. Pens scratched across paper. Digital records updated. No raised voices interrupted the process. The company's future changed through procedure rather than confrontation. Within 48 hours, the consequences began unfolding. James Whitmore stood beside Sarah in the Mercer Island study while reviewing a series of official notices that had arrived throughout the morning. The court accepted the preservation petition. Sarah nodded. What about the banking order? James handed her another document. Approved. She read the opening paragraph carefully. Under judicial authority, financial institutions serving Davis Biotech were instructed to preserve all records associated with the transactions identified during the preliminary investigation. The order did not freeze ordinary business operations. It protected evidence, exactly as James had requested. Another envelope contained correspondence from the state financial regulator. An inquiry had officially begun. No accusations, no findings, simply a formal notice that investigators intended to examine the transactions highlighted during the shareholders' meeting. Sarah folded the letter carefully. Everything is moving very quickly. James smiled faintly. Only because the documentation was already organized. She looked toward Richard's notebook resting nearby. Months of quiet observation had become weeks of legal preparation. Weeks of preparation had become official procedure. The process felt almost strangely ordinary. No revenge, no celebration, only paperwork. Across the city, Davis Biotech no longer felt like the company Michael remembered. Employees spoke more quietly. Department managers avoided speculation. Outside counsel occupied several conference rooms, normally reserved for executive strategy sessions. Large cardboard evidence boxes appeared outside the legal department. Benjamin Carter supervised the collection personally. Every email archive, every approval log, every board memorandum, every digital backup. Nothing could be destroyed. Nothing could be altered. Olivia Parker watched the process from her desk. Benjamin approached her gently. I'll need access to the executive correspondence archive. She nodded immediately. Everything is ready. I appreciate your cooperation. Olivia hesitated. Mr. Carter? Yes. Is the company in trouble? Benjamin considered the question. The company deserves answers. She looked relieved by the honesty. What about Mr. Davis? Benjamin answered more quietly. He deserves the truth too. Michael remained inside his office long after everyone else had gone home. The large windows reflected his own tired expression back at him. For years, he had viewed this office as proof that determination conquered every obstacle. Tonight, it resembled a courtroom before the trial had even begun. He opened Benjamin's legal memoranda one by one. The first warning: concerns regarding delegation authority. The second: recommendations for additional shareholder review. The third: questions regarding consulting documentation. The fourth: requests for enhanced compliance procedures. Every memorandum carried Benjamin's signature. Everyone had been delivered months before. Michael remembered receiving them. He simply had not read them carefully. His phone vibrated. Sarah. He answered immediately. Hello? How are you? The question surprised him. You still ask that? I asked. Michael leaned back slowly. I've been reading. I thought you might. I should have listened. Sarah remained silent. He continued. I keep wondering whether all of this could have been avoided. She answered honestly. Some of it. Not all. No. Why? Because documents don't create themselves. Michael understood. Even if he had been more attentive, someone had still prepared questionable transactions. Someone had still submitted incomplete records. Someone had still benefited from the process. I'd like to see our son. You can. When? Tomorrow afternoon. I'll be there." After a brief pause, he quietly added, "Thank you." Sarah ended the call with the same calm dignity that had defined every conversation since leaving the hospital. No bitterness, no punishment, simply boundaries. The following afternoon, Michael drove to the Mercer Island house. Margaret Ellis greeted him politely before leading him to the living room. Sarah sat beside the fireplace feeding their son. The baby had grown stronger during the past week. His movements seemed more energetic. His eyes remained open longer. Michael smiled despite everything surrounding them. "He's changed." Sarah nodded. "They do that quickly." She gently placed the baby into Michael's arms. For several minutes, they spoke only about ordinary things: sleeping schedules, doctor appointments, feeding times, weight gain. The conversation felt strangely comforting, almost normal. Finally, Michael looked toward Sarah. "I've been thinking about the hospital." She waited. "I left because I believed the company needed me. I know. I was wrong." She answered softly, "You were." He looked down at his son. "I'll regret that day for the rest of my life." Sarah watched him carefully. Regret sounded different from excuses. He wasn't defending himself. He wasn't blaming pressure. He wasn't mentioning Rebecca or Daniel. He was accepting responsibility. That mattered. It did not erase the past, but it mattered. Back at Davis Biotech, outside investigators continued reviewing financial records. Karen Mitchell and her audit team occupied a temporary office established inside the legal department. Dozens of files covered the conference tables: wire transfers, vendor contracts, accounting ledgers. Benjamin entered carrying another archive box. More board correspondence. Karen accepted it. "We're making progress." "Anything significant?" she answered cautiously. "We've confirmed several approval pathways. But the money trail continues beyond the consulting firms." Benjamin frowned slightly. "To whom?" "We're still tracing ownership." She refused to speculate. Benjamin appreciated that. Facts first, always. Late that evening, James arrived at Sarah's house carrying fresh correspondence from the court. The judge approved another request. Sarah accepted the order. "What is it?" "Authorization to obtain expanded banking records." She carefully reviewed each page. The authorization extended beyond company accounts. Investigators could now examine transfers involving the consulting firms themselves. James looked at her. "This may answer where the money ultimately went." Sarah closed the file. "Or it may answer something else." "What do you mean?" She thought for a moment. "I still don't know whether Michael understood what was happening." James nodded. "And I don't want assumptions to fill the gaps." He smiled slightly. "You sound exactly like your father." "I hope that's a compliment." "It is." He looked toward Richard's notebook. "You've built this case the same way he built investments. Patiently. One verified fact at a time. Meanwhile, Daniel Brooks remained alone inside his own home office. Unlike previous evenings, he no longer appeared completely confident. His laptop displayed financial summaries alongside legal news updates. He understood investigations. He understood auditors. What troubled him most was something else entirely. Bank records. Invoices could be explained. Corporate strategy could be debated. Emails might be interpreted differently. Bank transfers rarely lied. He closed the laptop slowly. For the first time since the shareholders' meeting, uncertainty replaced confidence. Not because anyone had accused him, because the evidence continued moving closer. Several days later, another formal notice arrived at Davis Biotech. The board of directors had scheduled an emergency session. Attendance was mandatory. Outside legal counsel would present updated findings. Regulatory observers had accepted invitations. The forensic audit would continue. Until then, one temporary measure would immediately take effect. Harold Bennett read the notice aloud before the executive committee. Effective immediately, the chief executive officer shall refrain from approving extraordinary financial transactions until completion of the independent review. The restriction was procedural rather than punitive. Yet everyone understood its meaning. Michael remained CEO. But for the first time since founding the company, his authority no longer stood alone. Every major decision would require additional oversight. Every signature would receive additional scrutiny. Every document would be examined. Michael accepted the resolution without objection. He had finally begun understanding something Sarah had recognized long ago. Power without accountability was never real leadership. And accountability had only just begun. 3 weeks after the special shareholders meeting, the hearing room inside the King County Courthouse was quiet enough that every page turned could be heard. There were no television cameras, no reporters shouting questions, no crowded public gallery hoping for scandal. The proceeding was administrative rather than criminal. Its purpose was simple review, the evidence gathered during the court-authorized preservation process, determine whether further legal action was justified, and ensure that the interests of shareholders had been protected while the investigation continued. Sarah Davis arrived early. She wore the same understated style that had characterized every appearance since leaving the hospital, a navy suit, a plain white blouse, and no jewelry except her wedding band. Her son remained at home with Margaret Ellis. James Whitmore placed a stack of neatly organized binders on the counsel table. "Everything is indexed." Sarah nodded. "Thank you." Across the room, Michael entered alone. He looked noticeably different. The confidence that once accompanied every step had been replaced by quiet restraint. He greeted no one immediately. Instead, he acknowledged Sarah with a small nod. She returned it. Neither smiled, neither looked away. The silence between them no longer felt hostile. It felt honest. The administrative judge, Eleanor Price, entered promptly at 9 o'clock. Everyone stood. After brief procedural remarks, the hearing began. "Our purpose today," Judge Price said, "is not to determine criminal liability." She looked around the room. "It is to determine whether sufficient evidence exists to continue formal legal proceedings regarding corporate governance and fiduciary responsibilities." Every person present understood the distinction. This hearing would not produce dramatic verdicts. It would establish facts. Karen Mitchell, lead partner from Northbridge Audit Group, testified first. She summarized weeks of forensic work, thousands of financial records reviewed, hundreds of electronic communications examined, corporate policies compared against actual practice. No exaggeration entered her testimony. Only documented findings. Judge Price asked the first important question. "Did your investigation conclude that improper financial authorization procedures occurred?" Karen answered immediately. "Yes." "Were those procedures consistent with company policy?" "No." "Were they repeated?" "Yes." She paused. "Repeatedly." Daniel Brooks sat motionless. Rebecca Collins looked down at her notes. Michael listened without interruption. Benjamin Carter testified next. He carried with him every legal memorandum he had written over the previous year. Judge Price reviewed them carefully. "You prepared these warnings before the disputed transactions." "I did." "And management received them?" "Yes." Michael spoke quietly. "I received them." Judge Price turned toward him. "Did you read them?" Michael did not attempt to protect himself. "Not carefully enough." The courtroom remained silent. Judge Price asked another question. Did anyone prevent you from reviewing them? No. Did anyone instruct you to ignore legal advice? Michael hesitated. No. He could have mentioned deadlines, investor pressure, Rebecca's recommendations, Daniel's confidence. Instead, he accepted responsibility for his own choices. Judge Price made a brief note. That answer mattered. Olivia Parker testified after Benjamin. She described discovering the missing email attachments, the IT recovery, the restored invoices, the absence of supporting consulting reports. James asked only a few questions. You altered no records? No. You simply reported what you found? Yes. Benjamin declined cross-examination. The facts spoke clearly enough. Then came testimony few people expected to carry emotional weight. Dr. Emily Foster entered the witness stand. She was not there to discuss corporate governance. She had been asked only to confirm a timeline. James approached respectfully. Doctor, were you treating Sarah Davis on the morning of September 14th? I was. Did Mr. Michael Davis accompany her to the hospital? Yes. What was Sarah's medical condition? She was experiencing preterm labor. James nodded. Did you advise Mr. Davis to remain? I did. What was his response? Emily answered carefully. He chose to leave. Judge Price looked up briefly. For what reason? A corporate board meeting. Emily's testimony contained no judgment, only chronology. Grace Miller testified next. Her memory matched Emily's precisely. She described Michael leaving, Sarah signing her own consent forms, the brief text message Sarah sent afterward. Nothing more. James asked one final question. During that entire time, did Sarah make any statement expressing revenge against her husband? Grace shook her head. No. Did she ask anyone to stop him from leaving? No. Did she criticize him? No. Grace paused. The only thing she asked for was her attorney. The hearing room became completely still. Sarah lowered her eyes. She remembered that morning clearly, not because Michael had left, because that had been the moment she understood emotion could no longer solve what lay ahead. Only law could. Judge Price called a short recess. During the break, Michael approached Sarah in the hallway. I've been thinking about that day. She looked toward him. So have I. I remember believing I'd return before anything happened. I know. I didn't. No. Michael struggled to continue. I've apologized. You have. It doesn't feel sufficient. Sarah answered gently. Some things never will. He nodded. I understand. After several moments, he quietly asked, Do you hate me? The question surprised even him. Sarah looked through the courthouse window before answering. No, Michael blinked. No. I hate what happened. She paused. But hatred would only keep me standing in that hospital hallway forever. Michael lowered his head. Her words carried no accusation, only truth. The afternoon session focused entirely on banking records. James introduced certified documentation obtained through court authorization, wire transfers, payment confirmations, corporate account histories. Karen explained the sequence carefully. Money left Davis Biotech. Funds reached consulting firms. From there, investigators traced multiple transfers into a network of investment entities. Judge Price reviewed the diagrams patiently. Have ultimate beneficial owners been identified? Karen answered. Partially. Do those entities appear connected to current company executives? Karen chose her words with precision. The investigation remains ongoing. She refused to speculate beyond verified evidence. Sarah appreciated that. The process remained disciplined, exactly as Richard would have wanted. Late in the afternoon, Harold Bennett testified regarding the emergency actions taken by the board. He described the unanimous vote, the preservation orders, the temporary restrictions on executive authority. Judge Price asked, "Why did the board act unanimously?" Harold answered honestly, "Because the evidence justified questions. Not conclusions. No. Questions." The distinction appeared repeatedly throughout the hearing. Facts before conclusions. Procedure before punishment. Evidence before judgment. As the day drew toward its conclusion, Judge Price reviewed the accumulated record. She looked around the courtroom. The evidence presented today establishes sufficient grounds for continued legal review regarding fiduciary governance, financial authorization procedures, and corporate oversight. She closed the file before her. The court therefore authorizes the investigation to continue. No gasps, no dramatic reactions, only another step, another lawful procedure, another page in the process. Outside the courthouse, evening sunlight stretched across the courthouse steps. James gathered the binders. Karen spoke briefly with regulators. Benjamin returned to the company. Olivia quietly left through a side entrance. Michael stood alone for several moments before approaching Sarah one final time. "I don't know what happens next," Sarah answered honestly. "Neither do I." "But you'll continue." "Yes. Because of me." She slowly shook her head. "Because of the company." He looked away. "I finally understand." She waited. "I spent years believing Davis Biotech belonged to me. It never did. It belonged to everyone who trusted us." Sarah nodded once. "Now you understand leadership." Michael managed a faint, tired smile. "I learned it much too late." Sarah offered no argument. Some truths required nothing more. As she walked toward James's waiting car, Michael remained standing on the courthouse steps. Months earlier, he had believed success meant reaching the top alone. Now he understood something entirely different. The greatest mistake of his career had not been trusting the wrong people. It had been believing responsibility could ever be delegated. And somewhere across Seattle, his young son slept peacefully, unaware that two adults were slowly learning the lesson his grandfather had understood all along. Integrity was never proven by power. It was proven by what someone chose to do when the evidence finally spoke louder than pride. Autumn gradually surrendered to winter. By early December, the glass towers of downtown Seattle reflected shorter days and colder mornings. Inside Davis Biotech, however, the atmosphere had changed more dramatically than the weather outside. The independent forensic investigation had continued for nearly 2 months. Every payment, every contract, every executive authorization, every electronic record. Nothing had been overlooked. Employees no longer whispered about rumors. They waited for decisions. Those decisions finally arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. The board of directors gathered once again inside the same conference room where Sarah had first revealed her identity as the controlling shareholder. The room looked familiar. The people inside it did not. Daniel Brooks no longer occupied the seat reserved for the chief financial officer. His attorney now represented him during ongoing regulatory proceedings. Rebecca Collins sat several chairs farther from the center of the table than she once had. Benjamin Carter occupied a position beside Harold Bennett, rather than near the end of the table. Michael Davis entered last. He carried no presentation, no prepared speech, only a thin folder containing his personal notes. Sarah arrived moments later. She greeted everyone with the same quiet courtesy she had shown throughout every meeting. No celebration, no visible satisfaction. Her authority required no performance. Harold Bennett called the meeting to order. The independent investigation has now reached its preliminary conclusions. He looked toward Karen Mitchell. The floor is yours. Karen stood. Her final report filled 3 large binders. She summarized weeks of work with remarkable precision. The investigation confirmed repeated failures in corporate governance. She paused briefly. Documentation further establishes that consulting payments were approved without sufficient supporting evidence. Another page turned. The investigation identified intentional concealment of financial information by certain executives. Harold looked toward her. Can you identify those individuals? Karen answered carefully. Based upon the evidence currently available, Daniel Brooks knowingly authorized false documentation supporting multiple consulting transactions. She continued. Rebecca Collins approved strategic recommendations, relying upon documentation she did not verify. Rebecca lowered her eyes. Karen turned another page. As Chief Executive Officer, Michael Davis approved numerous transactions without conducting reasonable executive review. Michael nodded once. I did. Karen looked directly at him. Our investigation found no evidence that Mr. Davis personally benefited financially from the consulting arrangements. The room remained silent. She continued. However, executive negligence does not eliminate executive responsibility. Michael accepted the statement without objection. I understand. Benjamin Carter stood next. As General Counsel, I have reviewed the investigative findings. He looked toward every director individually. I recommend immediate governance reforms. Harold nodded. Please summarize. Benjamin opened a prepared document. First, he raised one finger. Terminate all contracts associated with the identified consulting firms. Second, refer all verified evidence involving Daniel Brooks to the appropriate regulatory authorities. Third, accept the resignation of Rebecca Collins from executive leadership. Rebecca quietly spoke. I've already submitted it. Benjamin acknowledged her statement. Fourth, he looked toward Michael. The board should determine appropriate executive leadership moving forward. Silence settled across the room. Everyone understood what that meant. Harold folded his hands. Mr. Davis. Michael slowly stood. For several moments he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice remained calm. I founded this company, believing hard work could overcome every obstacle. He looked around the table. I was wrong. No one interrupted. I believed trust could replace oversight. He paused. I believed good intentions were enough. Another pause. They weren't. He looked toward Sarah. I ignored legal warnings. Toward Benjamin. I failed to ask difficult questions. Toward Harold. I approved documents I should have examined. Finally, toward the entire board. I accept responsibility. No excuses followed. No attempt to shift blame. Only responsibility. Michael reached into his folder. I've prepared my resignation as Chief Executive Officer. The words landed quietly, yet they carried enormous weight. Harold accepted the envelope without opening it immediately. Thank you, Michael continued. I ask only one thing. Everyone waited. Protect the company. Sarah looked at him thoughtfully. That sentence reminded her of the man she had married years earlier. Not the executive consumed by ambition. The young entrepreneur who genuinely wanted to build something meaningful. Harold looked toward Sarah. As controlling shareholder, would you like to address the board before we vote? Sarah stood slowly. She placed both hands lightly on the table. Her voice remained soft enough that everyone leaned forward to hear. My father believed companies belong to the people who trust them. She paused. Employees. Another pause. Patients. Another. Investors. She looked around the room. They do not belong to any single executive. No one spoke. I did not come here to punish anyone. She glanced briefly toward Michael. I came because responsibility required action. She looked back toward the board. I support governance reform. She paused. I support independent oversight. Another pause. And I support leadership that welcomes difficult questions rather than avoiding them. She sat down. Her remarks lasted less than 3 minutes, yet they became the defining words of the meeting. The vote proceeded according to corporate bylaws. Resolution 1. Daniel Brooks's employment terminated unanimously. Resolution 2. Evidence referred to regulatory authorities. Approved unanimously. Resolution 3. Rebecca Collins' resignation accepted. Approved unanimously. Finally, Resolution 4. Acceptance of Michael Davis's resignation as Chief Executive Officer. Harold looked toward the directors. One by one, votes were cast. Approved. The decision became official. Michael was no longer CEO of Davis Biotech. He remained a shareholder. He remained the father of Sarah's child. But leadership now belonged to someone else. Harold turned toward Benjamin Carter. The Governance Committee recommends appointing Benjamin Carter as Interim Chief Executive Officer while the board conducts a national search. Benjamin appeared genuinely surprised. I wasn't expecting that recommendation. Thomas Green smiled slightly. That's one reason we made it. Several directors nodded. Benjamin had spent months defending procedure, even when no one wished to hear it. Integrity had quietly earned trust. Harold called the vote. Approved unanimously. Benjamin became interim CEO. He accepted only after making one condition. The legal investigation must continue without interference. Sarah immediately supported the condition. So do I. Harold smiled. Then it shall. Several weeks later, Davis Biotech announced a comprehensive governance reform program, independent compliance reviews, enhanced financial controls, mandatory executive oversight training, anonymous reporting systems, quarterly shareholder transparency meetings. Investors responded cautiously at first. Then gradually confidence returned. The company's stock stabilized. Employees noticed the difference. Meetings became shorter. Questions became welcome. Legal review occurred before approval rather than afterward. The culture slowly changed. One Saturday afternoon, Michael drove to the Mercer Island house carrying a small stuffed bear. Sarah opened the door herself. Our son is asleep. I can wait. She invited him inside. For nearly an hour, they spoke quietly about ordinary parenting decisions, pediatric appointments, first smiles, sleeping habits. Nothing about board meetings. Nothing about investigations. Eventually, Michael looked toward Sarah. I wanted to thank you. She seemed surprised. For what? You never tried to take my son away. He needs his father. You never humiliated me publicly. There was no reason to. You could have. Sarah smiled gently. I wasn't trying to win. Michael looked down. I know. Those 3 words carried more regret than any apology he had ever offered. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the front door. I don't expect forgiveness. Sarah answered honestly. I'm still learning what forgiveness looks like. He nodded. That's fair. He left quietly. Sarah watched through the window as his car disappeared down the tree-lined road. Margaret approached from the kitchen. "Do you think he'll be all right?" Sarah looked toward the nursery, where her son continued sleeping peacefully. "I think," she paused, "he's finally becoming the man he believed he already was." Outside, fresh snow began falling softly across Lake Washington. Inside, the house remained warm. The battle for the company had ended. The slower work of rebuilding lives had only just begun. 6 months later, Seattle welcomed the first warmth of spring. Cherry blossoms lined the streets surrounding Davis Biotech's headquarters, replacing the gray skies that had framed so much of the previous year. Employees arriving for work no longer walked through uncertainty. The company had regained its rhythm not because every problem had disappeared, but because every problem was now expected to face scrutiny instead of silence. Inside the lobby, a new statement had been engraved onto the wall beneath the company's mission: integrity before growth. Benjamin Carter had insisted that the words remain simple. No executive's name appeared beneath them. No tribute celebrated anyone's achievements. The principle belonged to everyone. The changes reached far beyond the executive floor. Every major financial decision now required independent review. Every consulting contract underwent competitive evaluation. Internal legal counsel participated before, not after executive approval. Quarterly shareholder forums allowed questions that management was required to answer publicly. Employees slowly stopped fearing difficult conversations. Investors noticed. Patients noticed. The market noticed. Confidence returned gradually, the same way trust always returned, one honest decision at a time. Sarah Davis visited headquarters only once every few weeks. Although she remained the controlling shareholder, she declined every invitation to become chief executive officer. Harold Bennett had asked her more than once. "The board would support you." Sarah always answered the same way. "The company needs independent management." "But you own it. I protect it." There is a difference. Benjamin respected that decision. He frequently consulted Sarah regarding long-term governance matters, but she refused to interfere with daily operations. "My father taught me that ownership creates responsibility," she once reminded him. "It doesn't create entitlement." Benjamin smiled. "He taught you well." Most mornings, Sarah's schedule looked remarkably ordinary. She woke before sunrise, fed her son, walked with him through the gardens surrounding Richard's old home on Mercer Island, read financial reports while he napped, met with charitable organizations supporting mothers experiencing difficult pregnancies. They quietly funded a new assistance program at Harbor Medical Center. The program paid emergency transportation costs, temporary housing, and childcare support for families whose loved ones faced complicated births. When Dr. Emily Foster learned who had established the fund, she called Sarah personally. "You could have named it after yourself." Sarah smiled. "That isn't why I created it." Emily understood. The hospital eventually dedicated the program simply as the Family Support Initiative. No photographs, no speeches, no ceremony. Sarah preferred it that way. Grace Miller occasionally visited the Mercer Island house. The baby, now 6 months old, laughed whenever she played peekaboo with him. "I hardly recognize him," Grace said one afternoon. "He was so tiny." Sarah looked toward her son, crawling determinedly across the living room rug. "He still surprises me every day." Grace hesitated. "And Michael," Sarah answered honestly. "He's trying." Grace nodded. "That matters." "It does." Michael no longer worked from the corner office overlooking downtown Seattle. After resigning as CEO, he accepted a senior operational position at a much smaller medical technology company outside the city. The salary was modest compared to what he once earned. The responsibilities were narrower. The public attention disappeared almost immediately. Strangely, he found relief in that. For the first time in years, he left work before sunset. He no longer measured every hour by stock prices or quarterly projections. Instead, every Wednesday evening and every Saturday afternoon belonged to his son. He never missed them, not once. One Saturday, while pushing a stroller through a neighborhood park, he noticed another father rushing past while answering business calls. Michael watched him disappear down the path. Months earlier, he would have admired such determination. Now, he quietly silenced his own phone. His son reached toward a flock of ducks near the pond. Michael laughed. The meeting reminder expired unanswered. For the first time, he felt no regret. The regulatory investigation eventually reached its conclusion. Daniel Brooks faced civil penalties related to financial misconduct and violations of corporate reporting obligations. Rebecca Collins accepted responsibility for failing to exercise proper executive oversight and was barred from serving as an officer of any publicly traded company for a period determined by regulators. Neither outcome brought Sarah satisfaction. Justice, she believed, should never become entertainment. Benjamin informed her of the final rulings during a routine shareholder meeting. She listened carefully, then simply asked, "Will the company recover completely?" Benjamin smiled. "It already has." One afternoon, nearly 7 months after the hospital incident, Michael asked Sarah whether they could meet somewhere other than the house. She suggested the Seattle waterfront. The spring air carried the scent of salt water as ferries crossed Elliott Bay in the distance. Their son slept peacefully inside his stroller. For several minutes, they watched the water without speaking. Finally, Michael broke the silence. "I came here because this is where we walked after our first anniversary." Sarah remembered. "You were convinced you'd never build a successful company." He laughed quietly. "I was. You asked whether success was worth risking everything." Michael lowered his eyes. "I didn't realize I would eventually answer my own question." Sarah looked toward the horizon. "You weren't the only one who changed." He turned. "What do you mean? I spent years believing silence alone could protect a marriage." She paused. "It couldn't." Michael nodded slowly. "No. It protected peace." She looked at him. "But not honesty." He accepted the observation without argument. "I wish I'd learned that sooner." "So do I." Another long silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, simply reflective. Michael finally spoke again. "I don't expect us to become who we once were." Sarah answered gently, "We can't." "I know." He looked toward their son. "But I hope one day he'll know we both tried to become better than we were." Sarah smiled softly. "I think that's something worth giving him." Later that evening, Sarah returned alone to Richard's study. The room remained almost unchanged. She opened the leather notebook that had accompanied her through every stage of the investigation. Page after page contained dates, financial references, questions, verified observations. The final blank page still remained. She picked up a pen. Unlike every previous entry, this one contained no transaction numbers. No legal references, no evidence, only a single paragraph. Truth does not erase pain. Justice does not restore lost moments. But when dignity survives, both the future no longer belongs to regret. She closed the notebook, then carefully placed it back onto the shelf beside Richard's journals. Its purpose had ended. Its lesson had not. Outside the window, Evening sunlight reflected across Lake Washington. Inside the nursery, her son laughed as Margaret read him a picture book. Sarah walked toward the sound without looking back. The company no longer required rescuing. The investigation no longer required her constant attention. Her future would not be measured by court filings, board resolutions, or ownership percentages. It would be measured by the quiet life she chose to build from everything she had learned. And somewhere beyond the city skyline, Davis Biotech continued moving forward under stronger leadership, stronger governance, and a culture that finally understood a truth once overlooked. The strongest foundation any company could possess was never ambition. It was accountability. In every life, there comes a moment when pride asks us to defend ourselves, while wisdom asks us to examine ourselves instead. Michael discovered that success without responsibility is fragile. Sarah discovered that silence has value only when it protects truth rather than hiding it. Neither of them received the future they once imagined, yet both found something more enduring, the chance to choose integrity after failure instead of pretending failure never happened. Perhaps that is why stories like this stay with us. They remind us that justice is rarely loud. It often arrives through patient documentation, honest conversations, and people who refuse to let anger become their guide. The deepest victories are not the ones that humiliate another person. They are the ones that allow someone to leave with dignity intact, knowing they acted according to conscience, even when doing so was difficult. If this story stayed with you, you're warmly invited to share your thoughts in the comments. We'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. If you enjoy thoughtful stories about resilience, accountability, and quiet strength, subscribing is a simple way to join us for the next journey. Thank you for spending your time here, and until next time, take good care of yourself and those who place their trust in you.